Jake Morrison counted the scratches on his cell wall for the 1,000th time. 1,095 days. 3 years since the galaxy declared humanity extinct. 3 years since anyone remembered he existed in this floating prison called Void's End. The metal floor was cold against his bare feet as he walked the same 6 steps from wall to wall. 6 steps forward, turn around, 6 steps back. He had worn a smooth path in the metal over the years. The guards found it amusing when they bothered to look. Most days they forgot he was there. Through the small window in his door, Jake watched the daily routine of the prison ship. Aliens of every shape and size moved through the corridors. Some walked like humans but had blue skin and extra arms. Others crawled on the ceiling with dozens of legs. A few floated in special suits filled with green gas. All of them were here for crimes that shook entire star systems. But Jake was just the last human. A curiosity. A dead species walking. The food slot opened with a sharp clang. A bowl of gray paste slid through, same as every day for 3 years. Jake picked it up and sniffed it. Still smelled like wet metal and sadness. He ate it anyway. Staying alive was important, even if no one knew why anymore. Still breathing, monkey boy? The voice belonged to Guard Captain Zek, a reptile creature, with scales that changed color when he was angry. Today they were a bored green. Jake looked up from his meal. Still here, Captain? Amazing how your kind lasted as long as they did. Weak bodies, short lives, no natural weapons. Zek's scales shifted to orange, which meant he was thinking. Yet you gave the Alliance more trouble than species twice your size. This was new. Zek rarely talked about the war. Most aliens preferred to pretend humans had simply died from disease, not been hunted down like animals. We were good at running away, Jake said carefully. Running away? Zek laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Your people held off 3 Alliance fleets at the Centauri station. Took them 6 months to crack that defense. That's not running away. Jake kept his face blank. He had helped design those defenses. The Alliance never figured out how a handful of human engineers had created shields that bent their weapons around the station like water around a rock. They never learned about Project Genesis either. Lucky shot, Jake said. Zek's scales turned, yellow with amusement. Sure, monkey boy. Lucky for 3 years straight. The guard moved on, his heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Jake finished his meal and returned to his exercises. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretches that kept his muscles from wasting away. The other prisoners thought he was crazy for staying in shape. What was the point when you were never getting out? But Jake had learned patience in the military. Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison, former head of Earth's Quantum Research Division. The Alliance would execute him on the spot if they knew who he really was. To them, he was just Scout Jake Morrison captured during a routine patrol, a nobody from a dead race. He was halfway through his workout when the prison shook. Not the usual vibration from the engines, but something different, harder, like they had docked with another ship. New prisoners were arriving. Jake pressed his ear to the door, listening to the sounds in the corridor. Heavy footsteps meant the guards were moving in force. Shouts and crashes suggested the new arrivals were not coming quietly. This was normal. Most prisoners fought until the very end. But one voice made him freeze. It was speaking Korathi, the clicking language of the species that had supposedly created the plague that killed humanity. Jake had learned dozens of alien languages during his imprisonment, but this one was different. The speaker was not just angry or scared. They were desperate. The humans live. The voice clicked frantically. The humans still live. You must listen to me. Jake's blood turned to ice. Someone knew the truth. The cell block went quiet. Even the most violent prisoners stopped their usual fighting and screaming. Everyone was listening now. Silence, Plaguemaker, came the voice of Commander Vex Thornscale, the prison administrator. Thornscale was a professional, unlike the guards. He never showed emotion, never lost control. But now his voice carried something Jake had never heard before. Fear. The Alliance lied to you all. The Karathi continued. The plague was not natural. We made it. We made it to kill the humans before they could finish their weapon, but some escaped, some still live. Jake's hands were shaking. 3 years of careful hiding, and now this. He had to know more. The sounds moved past his door. Through the small window, Jake caught a glimpse of the new prisoner, a Karathi scientist, smaller than most of his kind, with the pale skin that marked him as a lab worker rather than a warrior. His forearms were bound with energy chains, and his large black eyes were wide with terror. "Put him in Block 7, Thornscale ordered. "Maximum security." "Commander," one of the guards spoke up. "What about the human? Should we move him?" Jake held his breath. "The human?" Thornscale's voice was puzzled. "What about him? He's been here for years, just a scout. But if what the Karathi says is true—" "It's not true," Thornscale said firmly. "The humans are extinct. The Alliance confirmed it. This one is just trying to cause trouble." The footsteps faded as they moved the new prisoner to his cell. Jake sank to the floor, his mind racing. Someone knew humans were still alive. Someone knew about the plague being artificial. And now that someone was 3 blocks away, probably being prepared for interrogation. Jake had spent 3 years being invisible, being forgotten, being nobody. But now he had a choice to make. Stay hidden and let this Karathi die with his secrets, or risk everything to learn the truth. He thought about the human colonies hidden in the far reaches of space, small groups of survivors who had escaped the Alliance's hunt. They were counting on staying hidden until Project Genesis was complete, the weapon that could end the war or destroy the galaxy if it fell into the wrong hands. Jake knew the complete blueprints, every equation, every circuit, every safety protocol. The Alliance had been searching for it for years, never knowing they had imprisoned the only person who could build it. Now someone else knew humans were alive. Someone else might know where they were hiding. Jake made his decision. Tomorrow, he would find a way to talk to the Karathi scientist. 3 years of being nobody had taught him how to move through the prison without being seen. The guards thought he was harmless, broken by years of captivity. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That night, Jake lay on his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. For 3 years, he had been the last human as far as anyone knew. Tomorrow, he might discover he was not as alone as he thought. The idea filled him with hope and terror in equal measure. Outside his window, the stars turned slowly as the prison ship followed its endless patrol route. Somewhere among those stars, his people were waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to finish what they had started. Jake Morrison, the forgotten prisoner, closed his eyes and began to plan. The galaxy thought humanity was dead. Soon they would learn the truth. Humans were not extinct. They were just getting started. The war was far from over. Jake waited until the 3rd shift changed before making his move. The night guards were lazier than the day crew. They spent most of their time playing cards and drinking fermented juice that made them slow and stupid. He had learned the prison's rhythm over 3 years. Every bolt, every camera, every weak spot in the security system. The guards thought he was harmless, just another broken prisoner who had given up hope. They were wrong. Jake slipped his hand through the food slot and felt along the outside of his door. His fingers found the maintenance panel he had been working on for months. Tiny scratches that looked like normal wear, but were actually precise cuts made with a piece of metal he had sharpened on the floor. The panel popped open silently. Inside were the wires that controlled his door lock. Jake had studied them for weeks, learning which ones carried power and which ones carried signals. One small change would open his door without triggering alarms. 2 minutes later, Jake Morrison stepped into the corridor for the first time in 3 years. The prison at night was different. Emergency lights cast long shadows between the cell blocks. The air recycling system hummed louder without the noise of daily activity. Jake moved like a ghost, staying close to the walls where the cameras had blind spots. Block 7 was 4 levels down and heavily guarded. Jake took the maintenance tunnels that ran between the decks. They were cramped and hot, filled with pipes and cables that carried the ship's life support systems. No guards patrolled here because no prisoner was supposed to know these tunnels existed. Jake knew because he had spent 3 years listening. Every sound, every vibration, every pattern of movement in the ship. He had built a map in his mind more detailed than the prison blueprints. The tunnel above Block 7 was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Jake crawled on his belly, following the heat pipes toward the cell section. Through the metal grating, he could see into the corridor below. 2 guards stood outside the new prisoner's cell, but they were talking instead of watching. Jake found the ventilation shaft that led into the cell. It was too small for most aliens, but humans were built, smaller and more flexible. He squeezed through the opening and dropped silently into the darkness. The Karathi scientist was awake. He sat in the corner of his cell, all forearms wrapped around his knees. His black eyes reflected the emergency lights like mirrors. "Do not be afraid," Jake whispered in the Karathi language. "I am here to help." The alien jerked backward, his skin changing from pale gray to bright white with fear. "You are the human, the one they keep in Block 3. "Yes. I heard what you said about my people, about humans still being alive." The Karathi looked at Jake for a long moment. His skin slowly returned to normal color. "You speak our language. Well, for a simple scout." Jake smiled grimly. "I am good at learning things. Tell me what you know." The alien moved closer, keeping his voice low. "My name is Dr. Zilm. I was part of the team that created the plague. The Alliance told us it was to stop a human weapon that could destroy the galaxy." "What weapon?" "They called it Project Genesis, something about quantum fields and reality manipulation. The Alliance was terrified that humans would complete it, before they could be stopped." Jake's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. "So you helped create a plague to kill my entire species?" "Yes." Zilm's skin turned dark blue with shame. "But I learned the truth too late. The Alliance was not trying to save the galaxy. They wanted to rule it. Humans were the only species that could challenge their power." "How do you know humans are still alive?" Zilm reached into his mouth and pulled out a small data crystal, no bigger than a grain of rice. "I hid this when they captured me. It contains star charts showing human settlements in the outer rim. 12 colonies that survived, the plague, maybe more." Jake stared at the crystal. Proof that his people had survived. Hope that he thought was lost forever. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked. "Because I want to make things right," Zilm said. "The Alliance is planning something called Operation Cleanup. They are going to hunt down every remaining human settlement and destroy them completely. No survivors this time. When? Soon. Maybe weeks. Maybe days. That is why they captured me. I was trying to warn the colonies." Jake felt cold anger building in his chest. The Alliance had nearly succeeded in destroying humanity once. They were not going to get a second chance. "There is more," Zilm continued. "The Alliance believes one human survived who knows the Genesis Project secrets. They have been searching every prison, every slave camp, every refugee center in the galaxy. And if they find this person, they will torture the information out of him and then use it to build Genesis weapons themselves. With that power, no species in the galaxy could resist Alliance rule." Jake was quiet for several minutes thinking. Zilm watched him nervously. "There is someone else you should meet," Jake finally said. "Another prisoner who might help us." "Who?" "A Marthan warrior named Kresh. He is in Block 5. He mentioned once that his people have been helping human refugees." Zilm's eyes widened. "The Marthans are enemies of the Alliance. If they are protecting humans, then we might have allies we did not know about." Jake stood up and moved toward the ventilation shaft. "I will come back tomorrow night. We need to plan carefully." "Wait," Zilm called softly. "What is your real name? I do not think you are just a scout." Jake paused at the shaft opening. 3 years of hiding, of being nobody, of letting everyone think he was just another broken prisoner. But if he was going to save his people, he could not do it alone. "Jake Morrison," he said. "Former Lieutenant Colonel, Earth Defense Force." "Morrison." Zilm repeated the name carefully. "That name is in Alliance files. You are wanted for war, crimes. War crimes. Jake laughed bitterly. I helped design defenses that saved human lives. The Alliance calls that a crime because it stopped them from winning quickly. Jake climbed into the shaft and began crawling back toward the tunnel. Behind him, he heard Zilm whisper something in his own language. It sounded like a prayer. The journey back to his cell took longer than expected. Jake had to hide twice when guards made their rounds early. His muscles were sore from crawling through tight spaces and his hands were cut from the sharp metal edges. But he felt more alive than he had in 3 years. The next morning brought new problems. Commander Thornscale arrived at Jake's cell with 2 guards and a medical scanner. Routine health check, Thornscale announced, though his eyes suggested this was anything but routine. The scanner ran over Jake's body, checking for injuries, diseases, and hidden objects. Jake forced himself to breathe normally while the machine hummed around him. You seem to be in excellent physical condition for someone who has been imprisoned for 3 years, Thornscale observed. Most prisoners lose muscle mass and develop health problems. I exercise regularly, Jake said. Keeps me from going crazy. Indeed. Thornscale made notes on his datapad. Tell me, Morrison, have you noticed anything unusual lately? Strange sounds? Prisoners talking about things they should not know? Jake met the commander's eyes without flinching. This is a prison ship, Commander. Everyone talks about things they should not know. It is how we pass the time. Thornscale studied Jake's face for any sign of deception. Of course. Well, carry on then. After they left, Jake lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Thornscale suspected something. Maybe not specifically about Jake's midnight trip, but something was making the prison administrator nervous. That night, Jake made his way to Block 5 to find the Marthan warrior. Kresh was exactly what Jake expected from the stories other prisoners told. Nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick gray fur with arms like tree trunks and teeth that could bite through metal, but his eyes were intelligent and kind. So, Kresh rumbled in accented but clear standard language. The last human finally speaks to someone. I need your help, Jake said simply. Kresh smiled, showing those dangerous teeth. Good. I was wondering when you would stop pretending to be weak, the Yao. Big Alien listened while Jake explained about Zilm and the human colonies. When Jake finished, Kresh nodded slowly. My clan has been protecting a group of human refugees for 2 years. 43 individuals, including children. They are remarkable people, very clever, very brave. The Alliance is planning to hunt down all the remaining colonies. Then we must warn them first. Kresh's eyes gleamed in the darkness. I think it is time for some prisoners to have an accident with the communication systems. Jake smiled. For the first time since his capture, he was not alone in this fight. Tomorrow night, Jake said, we begin. The prison riot started at breakfast. Jake was eating his gray paste when the first explosion rocked the ship. Emergency lights began flashing red, and alarm sirens wailed through every corridor. Prisoners started shouting and banging on their cell doors, but this was not a normal riot. Jake had heard enough prison fights to know the difference. This was organized, planned. Someone had set off bombs in 3 different sections at exactly the same time. The Alliance had found them. Through his cell window, Jake watched guards running past in full combat armor. They were not just trying to stop a riot. They were hunting for specific prisoners. Jake's door clicked open, not from the inside this time, but from the main security station. Someone was releasing all the prisoners at once. In the chaos that followed, it would be easy for certain people to disappear or die. Jake stepped into the corridor and immediately saw the problem. Alliance soldiers in black armor were moving through the prison, not to stop the riot, but to use it as cover. They were checking prisoner identification numbers against a list on their data pads. They were looking for him, Zilm, and Kresh. A massive, 4th-hand prisoner came charging down the corridor, roaring with rage and swinging a metal pipe. 3 Alliance soldiers shot him with energy weapons that should have dropped him instantly. Instead, the Vorthon kept coming, his skin smoking from the burns. Something was wrong with their weapons. Jake pressed himself against the wall as the soldiers ran past, too busy dealing with the riot to notice one more prisoner in the chaos. He needed to find his allies before the Alliance found them first. Block 7 was in complete disorder. Prisoners were fighting guards were fighting each other, and Alliance soldiers were shooting anyone who got in their way. Jake crawled through the maintenance tunnels following the sounds of violence below. He found Zilm's cell empty, the door torn off its hinges. Dark blue blood stained the floor. Karathi blood. "Looking for your friend?" The voice came from behind. Him. Jake spun around to face an Alliance captain in black armor. His helmet was off, showing a human face with cold gray eyes and a scar across his left cheek. "Captain Ross Butler," the man introduced himself. "Alliance Intelligence, I have been looking for you for a very long time, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison." Jake's blood turned to ice. They knew who he was. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Jake said carefully. Butler laughed. "Jake Morrison, age 34, former head of Earth's Quantum Research Division, graduate of the Mars Military Academy, expert in theoretical physics and quantum field manipulation, designer of the Genesis project." The game was over. 3 years of hiding finished in one moment. "Where is Dr. Zilm?" Jake asked. Being questioned. "He has been very helpful, actually. Told us all about the human colonies in the Outer Rim. We will visit them very soon." Rage filled Jake's chest like fire. "You tortured him." "Of course we did. Just like we are going to torture you until you tell us everything about Project Genesis. The complete blueprints, every equation, every safety protocol." Butler raised his weapon, but Jake was already moving. 3 years of exercises in his cell had kept him in fighting shape. He dove to the side as energy bolts burned the air where he had been standing. The maintenance tunnel was too narrow for Butler to follow quickly. Jake crawled toward Block 5 as fast as he could, hearing the Alliance captain cursing behind him. He found Kresh in the middle of a battle. The Big Marthan was fighting 6 Alliance soldiers at once, using a broken cell door as a shield and a metal beam as a club. Bodies lay around him, both prisoners and guards. "Jake!" Kresh roared when he saw the human. "Perfect timing!" Jake picked up a fallen energy rifle and started shooting. The Alliance soldiers were wearing armor, but Jake knew exactly where the weak spots were. He had studied Alliance equipment for years during the war. 3 soldiers went down before the others realized. They were being shot from behind. By then, Kresh had closed the distance and was swinging his metal club like a hammer. "We have to get to the communication center," Jake shouted over the noise of battle. "Already tried," Kresh replied, smashing another soldier into the wall. "Alliance. Destroyed it first thing. But there is another way." The Marthan led Jake through corridors filled with smoke and fighting. Emergency systems were failing throughout the ship. Life support was cutting in and out. Artificial gravity was fluctuating and the lights kept going dark. They reached the ship's central computer core just as another explosion shook the prison. This one was bigger than the others. Something important had been hit. "The engine room," Kresh said grimly. "Alliance is trying to destroy the ship with everyone on it. Make it look like an accident." Jake stared at the computer terminal. It was his only chance to warn the human colonies before operation. Cleanup began. But using it would reveal his location to every Alliance ship in the sector. "I need 5 minutes," Jake told Kresh. "You will have them." The Marthan warrior took position at the door, ready to fight anyone who tried to enter. Jake's fingers flew over the computer controls, bypassing security systems and accessing the ship's long-range communication array. The first message went to coordinates he had memorized 3 years ago, a hidden human colony in the Kepler system. The second went to another colony near the Galactic Rim. The third went to a research station that might or might not still exist. Each message was the same. Genesis compromised. Alliance knows location. Evacuate immediately. Complete the project. Fight back. But Jake did not just send warnings. He sent something much more dangerous. The complete blueprints for Project Genesis, every equation and safety protocol he had kept locked in his memory for 3 years. If the Alliance wanted the weapon, they could have it, but so could everyone else. "Jake, we have company," Kresh shouted from the doorway. Alliance soldiers were cutting through the door with plasma torches. In minutes, they would break through. "Jake, activated one final subroutine, something he had hoped never to use. A hidden program buried deep in his neural implant, placed there by Earth's military before his last mission. It would burn out most of his brain, but it would also transmit everything he knew directly to human colonies across the galaxy. Kresh, get away from the door. The Marthan warrior dove aside just as Jake activated the program. Pain exploded through his skull like lightning. Every nerve in his body caught fire, but the transmission went out, carrying 3 years of intelligence about Alliance movements, prison locations, and strategic weaknesses. The door exploded inward. Alliance soldiers poured into the room, led by Captain Butler. His scarred face was twisted with rage. "You stupid fool," Butler screamed. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Jake smiled despite the agony in his head. "I gave my people a fighting chance." Butler shot him. The energy bolt hit Jake in the chest, spinning him around and slamming him into the computer console. He could smell his own flesh burning, could taste blood in his mouth, but he was still alive. "I want him conscious for questioning," Butler told his soldiers. "Medical team, keep him breathing, but make sure he can feel pain." They dragged Jake away from the computer, leaving Kresh fighting. A hopeless battle against overwhelming odds. The last thing Jake saw was his friend going down under a pile of Alliance soldiers, still fighting even as they stunned him unconscious. In the medical bay, Alliance doctors worked to keep Jake alive while preparing him for interrogation. They gave him drugs that made every nerve ending scream, then drugs that kept him awake despite the pain. "Tell us about the Genesis field equations," Butler demanded. Jake spat blood at him. "Go to hell. We already have Dr. Zilm's confession. We know about the quantum destabilization process. We just need the final calculations. Then you don't need me." Butler smiled coldly. "Oh, but we do. Because Zilm lied to us. The equations he gave us are wrong. They would destroy any ship that tried to use them. But you, Colonel Morrison, you would never lie about something that could destroy innocent people." Jake closed his eyes. They were right. Even under torture, he would not give them false information that could hurt civilians. It was his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. "The war is over, Colonel. Your people are scattered and dying. Give us Genesis and we will make their deaths quick and painless." Jake opened his eyes and looked at Butler with contempt. "The war is not over, Captain. It just began." Somewhere in the galaxy, human colonies were receiving his message. They were learning that they were not alone, that someone was still fighting, that the weapon they needed to win was finally within their reach. The Alliance thought they had won by capturing him. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Jake Morrison smiled through his pain and waited for the real war to begin. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. The Alliance doctors kept him alive with machines and drugs, but his body was failing. The neural implant had burned out half his brain when he transmitted the Genesis blueprints. Captain Butler visited him every few hours to ask the same questions. Where were the human colonies? How did the Genesis field equations work? What were the safety protocols? Jake gave him nothing but silence. On the 3rd day, everything changed. The first sign was the vibration in the ship's hull. Not the usual engine noise, but something else. Something that made the metal walls hum with a frequency Jake had never heard before. Then came the explosions. Not inside the prison ship, but outside. Distant flashes of light visible through the medical bay windows. Energy weapons firing in space, the kind used by warships in battle. "What is happening?" Butler demanded when he rushed into the medical bay. "Sir, we are under attack," a young Alliance officer reported. "Unknown ships appeared out of nowhere. They are using some kind of new technology. Our sensors cannot lock onto them properly." Butler's scarred face went pale. "How many ships?" "We count at least 50, sir. But they keep appearing and disappearing. It might be more." Jake smiled through his pain. The human colonies had received his message. They were fighting back. "Impossible," Butler said. "Humans do not have 50 warships. We destroyed their fleet years ago." "Sir," the officer continued nervously, "these ships are not like anything in our databases. They appear to be using the quantum field technology mentioned in the intercepted transmissions, Genesis. The humans had built it. They had turned Jake's weapon designs into reality. Butler grabbed Jake by the throat. "What did you do? What did you tell them?" "I gave them hope," Jake whispered. The ship shook again, harder this time. Emergency. Lights began flashing throughout the medical bay. Through the windows, Jake could see Alliance warships exploding in brilliant bursts of light. "Sir, we need to evacuate," the officer said. "The flagship is requesting immediate withdrawal to safe space." "No," Butler screamed. "We do not run from dead humans. Continue the attack." But it was too late. The Alliance fleet was already breaking apart. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for decades were being destroyed by an enemy they could not even see properly. The prison ship lurched as something hit it. Not weapons fire, but a docking clamp. Someone was boarding them. Butler drew his sidearm. "Get Morrison to the escape pods. We are not losing him now." Two soldiers lifted Jake from the medical bed and started carrying him toward the escape pod bay. Jake's body was too weak to resist, but his mind was clearer than it had been in days. They made it halfway before the boarding party found them, the corridor filled with smoke and the sound of energy weapons. But these were not Alliance weapons. The energy signatures were different, more focused and powerful. "Alliance soldiers, surrender immediately," a voice called through the smoke. The accent was familiar. American. Human. Jake's heart pounded. His people had come for him. Butler and his soldiers took cover behind a bulkhead and returned fire. "Never. We have Morrison. Fall back or we kill him." The shooting stopped. Footsteps approached slowly through the smoke. "Captain Butler," the human voice said calmly. "My name is Colonel Lisa Carter, Earth Defense Force. You are holding our officer. Release him now." Jake tried to speak, but his throat was too damaged. Lisa Carter. He knew that name. She had been a lieutenant when he last saw her working on defensive systems for the outer colonies. "Your officer is a war criminal," Butler shouted back. "He will be tried by Alliance justice." "Alliance justice?" Carter laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean the same justice that tried to wipe out our entire species? I think not." Butler pressed his weapon against Jake's head. One step. Closer. And he dies. The corridor went quiet. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, weak and irregular from the medical machines keeping him alive. Then something impossible happened. Jake felt the air around him change, like the moment before lightning strikes. The metal walls began to hum with that same strange frequency he had heard earlier. A quantum field was forming around them. "Captain Butler," Carter's voice came again, but now she sounded different, confident, almost amused. "Do you know what happens when someone tries to fire an energy weapon inside an active Genesis field?" Butler's eyes went wide with fear. "That is impossible. You cannot generate a quantum field that precise. 3 years ago you would have been right, but we had a very good teacher. Someone sent us complete blueprints and safety protocols. Someone who believed we could do better than just survive." The humming grew louder. Jake could see the air, itself beginning to shimmer around them, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Butler's hand was shaking as he held the weapon to Jake's head. "You are bluffing. No human technology could do this." "Try to pull that trigger," Carter suggested. "See what happens." Butler's finger tightened on the weapon. There was a flash of light, but not from the gun. The energy weapon simply dissolved. In his hand, its matter scattered harmlessly by the quantum field. The Alliance soldiers stared in shock as their weapons crumbled to dust. Then they ran. Butler tried to follow them, but the quantum field held him in place like invisible chains. He could move slowly, but every step was like walking through thick mud. Human soldiers emerged from the smoke. They wore armor Jake had never seen before, sleek and angular with energy shields that flickered around them like soap bubbles. But their faces were human faces, and their eyes were filled with the determination Jake remembered from Earth's final days. Colonel Carter was a tall woman with short brown hair and eyes like steel. She knelt beside Jake and checked his injuries, with the efficiency of someone who had seen too many battlefields. "Hello, Colonel Morrison," she said softly. We came as soon as we got your message. The colonies, Jake managed to whisper. Are they safe? Safe and fighting back. Operation Cleanup ran into some unexpected resistance. Turns out humans are harder to kill when they have Genesis weapons, Carter signaled to her soldiers. They lifted Jake onto a medical stretcher with gentle hands. We're getting you out of here. Our ship has the best medical bay in the fleet. Kresh, Jake said. Marthan Warrior, Block 5. Friend. Already found him. He is alive and asking about you. Something about promising to get you 5 minutes. And being sorry it took 3 days. Jake smiled. Kresh had survived. That was good news. As they carried him through the corridors, Jake saw the aftermath of the human assault. Alliance soldiers sat with their hands behind their heads, their weapons destroyed by selective quantum fields. The prison ship's systems were intact, but completely under human control. How many ships? Jake asked as they reached the docking bay. 57 combat vessels, Carter replied, plus support ships and hospital ships. The first human fleet, rebuilt from scratch using your Genesis technology. Through the docking bay windows, Jake could see them, sleek human warships that seemed to bend light around their hulls. They moved through space like fish through water, appearing and disappearing as their quantum drives shifted them between dimensions. It is beautiful, Jake whispered. Wait until you see what we did with the defensive systems, Carter said. Your shield designs from Centauri Station were just the beginning. They transferred Jake to the human medical ship, where doctors who had studied his original research worked to repair the damage from his neural implant. As the medical bay doors closed, Jake caught a glimpse of Captain Butler being led away in quantum restraints. What will happen to him? Jake asked. War crimes trial, Carter said simply. Same as any other Alliance officer who participated in genocide. Jake closed his eyes as the human doctors worked. For 3 years he had been the last human anyone knew about, a forgotten prisoner on a ship full of criminals. Now he was surrounded by his own people again, people who had taken his desperate message and turned it into salvation for their species. The war was far from over. The Alliance still controlled most of the galaxy, and they would not give up easily. But now the fight was fair. Humans were back, and they were not running anymore. Colonel, Carter said as the medical drugs began taking effect, there is something you should know. The Genesis project worked better than we hoped. Much better. How much better? Jake asked drowsily. Carter smiled. Let me put it this way. The Alliance spent 3 years hunting for human survivors. Now we are hunting them. Jake Morrison fell asleep for the first time in 3 years without counting scratches on a cell wall. When he woke up, he would find that the galaxy had changed forever, and it was only the beginning. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human flagship New Earth, watching the final battle of the Genesis War unfold in the space around them. The Alliance had gathered every ship they could find for this last desperate attack. 3,000 warships from a dozen different species, all united in their determination to destroy humanity before the Genesis technology could spread further. They were losing. Jake's neural implant had been repaired by human doctors using quantum healing technology. His brain worked differently now, able to process quantum field equations as naturally as breathing. He could feel the Genesis fields around every human ship, could sense the quantum currents that made their weapons and shields possible. Alliance flagship is requesting surrender terms, reported Captain Dan Hayes from his command station. Put them through, Colonel Carter ordered. She had been promoted to admiral after the rescue mission, and now commanded the entire human fleet. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Alliance command ship. Admiral Rex Vorthak, the alien who had ordered humanity's extinction, looked older than Jake remembered. His blue skin had gone pale with stress, and his 3 eyes showed the exhaustion of a leader watching his empire crumble. Admiral Carter, Vorthak said in his clicking voice, I am prepared to discuss terms. Unconditional surrender, Carter replied without hesitation. All Alliance forces will stand down immediately. All war crime suspects will be handed over for trial. All occupied planets will be granted independence. That is not acceptable. We can offer a ceasefire and negotiations. Jake stepped forward. Admiral Vorthak, this is Colonel Jake Morrison. Do you remember me? Vorthak's eyes focused on Jake's face. Recognition and fear flickered across his alien features. The Genesis scientist. You were supposed to be dead. I was supposed to be a lot of things. Dead, forgotten, broken. But humans are difficult to kill permanently. Through the ship's quantum sensors, Jake could feel the Alliance fleet's formations crumbling. Their ships were trapped in overlapping Genesis fields that made their weapons useless and their engines unreliable. Human vessels phased in and out of normal space like ghosts, striking without warning and disappearing before return fire could reach them. Your fleet is finished, Admiral, Jake continued. Your ships cannot fight what they cannot touch. Your weapons cannot damage what exists in a different quantum state. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated with honor. Honor? Vorthak's voice rose with anger. You speak of honor after what you have done? Your Genesis fields are tearing holes in space itself. Your weapons violate the fundamental laws of physics. Physics is not about laws, Jake said calmly. It is about understanding. We understand quantum mechanics better than you do. That makes us stronger. On the tactical display, Jake watched as another Alliance battle group tried to retreat. Human pursuit ships followed them through quantum space, emerging inside their formation and disabling their engines with surgical precision. No Alliance personnel were being killed unnecessarily, but their ability to fight was being systematically destroyed. This is impossible, Vorthak said desperately. No species can master quantum technology this quickly. It should take centuries of research. Most species, yes, Jake agreed. But humans learn differently. We adapt. We improvise. We take broken pieces and build something new. Admiral Carter moved to stand beside Jake. Admiral Vorthak, you have 10 minutes to surrender. After that, we will disable your remaining ships and take you into custody anyway. The transmission ended. Vorthak's image disappeared from the screen. Jake walked to the observation window and looked out at the battle. Human ships moved through space like schools of fish, coordinated and graceful. Their quantum drives left trails of distorted light that looked almost beautiful against the darkness. 3 years ago, these same ships had been hiding in asteroid fields and forgotten star systems, their crews living on recycled air and rationed food. Now they commanded technology that made them nearly unstoppable. Incoming transmission from the Alliance flagship, Captain Hayes reported. Vorthak appeared on screen again, but this time he was not alone. The bridge behind him was filled with officers from different Alliance species. They all looked defeated. We surrender, Vorthak said simply. The words echoed across every human ship in the fleet. 3 years of running and hiding were over. Humanity had won. But Jake felt no triumph, only sadness. Too many people had died to reach this moment. Too many. Worlds had been destroyed by the Alliance's greed for power. All human ships stand down, Admiral Carter ordered. Begin recovery operations for Alliance survivors. Over the next few hours, Jake watched as human crews rescued Alliance personnel from damaged ships. They treated their former enemies with the same care they would show their own people. It was a very human thing to do. Dr. Zilm found Jake in the ship's medical bay later that day. The Karathi scientist had recovered from his injuries and was now working with human researchers to develop peaceful uses for Genesis technology. I have been thinking about what you said during the battle, Zilm said. About humans learning differently. What about it? I think I understand now why the Alliance was so afraid of your species. It was not just the Genesis project. It was how quickly you went from nearly extinct to controlling the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Jake nodded. Humans do not give up. Even when everything seems hopeless, we find a way to keep fighting. More than that, Zilm continued. Other species would have used Genesis technology to conquer the galaxy. Humans used it to save everyone, even their enemies. Jake looked out the window at the rescue operations. Human medical ships were treating Alliance wounded without asking about their species or their crimes. It was the right thing to do, but it was also strategically smart. Every Alliance soldier who survived would remember human mercy. What happens now? Zilm asked. Now we rebuild, Jake said. The Alliance is finished as a military force, but there are still billions of people living under their rule. They will need help transitioning to independence. And the Genesis technology? Jake smiled. We share it. Carefully with safeguards, but we share it. No one species should have this much power. Kresh appeared in the doorway, still wearing the formal uniform Admiral Carter had given him when she made him an official human ally. The big Marthan looked uncomfortable in clothes that were designed for smaller beings. Jake, they want you on the bridge, Kresh rumbled. Something about a transmission from Earth. Jake's heart skipped. Earth had been unreachable since the Alliance. Blockade began 3 years ago. If communications were getting through now, it meant the homeworld had survived. The bridge was crowded when Jake arrived. Every officer and crew member who could fit was gathered around the main screen. Admiral Carter was standing with tears in her eyes. Colonel Morrison, she said when she saw him. I think you should hear this. The screen showed a familiar blue planet with white clouds and brown continents. Earth exactly as Jake remembered it, but something was different. The orbital space around the planet was filled with construction platforms and defense stations, all built using Genesis technology. This is President Maria Santos of the United Earth Government, a woman's voice said from the speakers. To all, human forces in the galaxy, welcome home. The bridge erupted in cheers. Crew members hugged each other and wiped away tears. After 3 years of believing their homeworld was lost, Earth was not just alive, but thriving. The blockade is broken, President Santos continued. Alliance forces have withdrawn from the Sol system. We are prepared to receive refugees and coordinate humanitarian aid throughout the galaxy. Jake closed his eyes and felt something he had not experienced since his capture. Peace. Not just the absence of war, but the deep satisfaction of knowing his people were safe. Colonel, Admiral Carter said softly, the President specifically asked to speak with you. Jake opened his eyes. On the screen, President Santos was looking directly at him through the quantum communication link. Colonel Morrison, she said, on behalf of all humanity, thank you. Your sacrifice saved our species. I did what anyone would have done, Jake replied. No, the President said firmly. You did what humans do. You never gave up hope even when hope seemed impossible. You found a way to turn our greatest defeat into our greatest victory. Jake looked around the bridge at the faces of his fellow humans. 3 years ago, he had been alone in a prison cell, believing his people were extinct. Now he was surrounded by friends and allies, watching his species take its place among the stars as protectors rather than conquerors. The galaxy would never be the same. The Genesis technology would revolutionize everything from medicine to space travel. Former enemies would become allies. New worlds would be explored and settled. But most importantly, the idea that any species could be wiped out for being different was finished forever. Humans had proven that survival was not about being the strongest or the most numerous. It was about adapting, learning, and never giving up hope. Jake Morrison, the last human prisoner, smiled as he watched the stars. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning.